looking at the UK, they've come out with new policies and new regulations to enable competition. So they came out with a framework to allow what are referred to as challenger banks. So if you and I wanted to go and start a bank, we could actually do that in the UK. So we could go over there. I mean, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but we could actually start a bank. You can't really do that in Canada. You'd need, $100 million to do that plus.
Founded in 2017, Startwell is Toronto's independent hub for innovators to collaborate. Our podcasts relate perspectives from the world's most diverse urban population to reflect unique insights into global business, media, and culture. Okay, Cato, welcome to the Startwell podcast. I'm really excited to talk about a bunch of stuff with you about the history of your company, the evolution of the company, the current incarnation of it, and then the meta on the FinTech world, the world of banking in Canada, and why that's unique. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
And you've been in the game for a little while.
I have.
So first up, Cato, introduce yourself for our listeners that don't know your company, Loop.
Yeah. So my name's Cato, as you said. Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be here.
Nice.
Loop is a cross-border banking platform. So what we do is we help companies that are based in Canada but want to expand outside of Canada. So they want to build their businesses around the world, do that more easily. So we would eliminate the friction from managing your finances across borders, which historically has been very difficult to do. So the world of banking that's existed for hundreds of years now has been inherently domestic. So, when you go to your bank, a Canadian bank is a Canadian bank and an American bank is an American bank.
Right.
But what we're trying to do is change that notion to say that if you're building a business today, it's now an international business. Businesses exist all around the world. You can sell to customers all around the world. A lot of businesses are importing products from all around the world. So why are the financial services that they use also inherently domestic? They should be international because that's the way the business is done. So we're trying to kind of recreate a lot of how financial services is shaped by making a platform that allows you to do business internationally as easy as it is to, go to your local branch historically and open up an account.
So let's paint the picture from the behind the scenes, because I think a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the functionings of banks, which really is the majority of people in the world.
Yeah.
We just trust that banks can do stuff and that they won't lose our money.
Yeah.
But let's paint this picture of kind of like the thing that you guys, that you mentioned being focused on now, which is this kind of cross-border payments, foreign currencies, international business transactions happening under one entity. What are right now the pain points with relying on your domestic bank for these things?
Yeah, a lot of domestic banks don't have the capability to easily transact internationally. So, we can go down to the foundation of what banks are. They're effectively a place to put your money. So a lot of people will go and put their deposits, store their money with a bank, and the bank will then take that money and go lend it out to borrowers. That was like the original idea behind banking. It's why banks were created and why they exist.
And why they got robbed. It's like Wild West banking.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But because that was the original reason banks were created and why banks exist, there's a lot of additional supplementary services that people started to need. Things like credit cards, payments, the ability to easily take money out of your account or transfer to family, in other countries in the world. All that stuff was built on top of the original idea behind a bank.
Yeah.
And so it was very much built in a way that was not conducive to the core of what a bank is actually supposed to do. So the best way to think about it is like the bank's core operation is taking money in and lending it out. It's not moving money around the world. And so there's a lot of friction associated with all of those ancillary services that banks offer, because at their core, they're really just designed to take money in and put it out. And so over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of different service providers who have been created to solve some of the gaps that exist when you're trying to move money around the world, when you're trying to pay a vendor, somewhere in Europe, Africa, Asia, when you're trying to send money there's lots of service providers who've been trying to solve for that. Or when
these are B2B service companies servicing the banks.
Correct. Or servicing, the end enterprise. So like if you're a large enterprise, they might sell directly to you.
What's an example?
Of a large payment provider?
Is Swift?
So
An example?
sort of. Swift is like a payments network. So what Swift is like the underlying network that allows banks to transfer money internationally. So I'm glad you asked that, because that is an example of a legacy and antiquated way of moving money internationally, but that's been the most widely adopted standard because all the banks use that exact standard for moving money around the world, right? So you can look at Swift, and then there's been other people who have tried to create a slightly more efficient way to move money around the world, right? So if we go even more to like recent times in the last 10, 20 years, there's like companies like Payoneer, for example. Payoneer is a large company that effectively mostly services like Amazon businesses. So a lot of Amazon businesses that would need to repatriate their money from wherever their Amazon marketplace is back into their domestic country. So let's say I'm a Chinese-based Amazon seller and I'm selling into the US.
Yeah.
What they would do is they would help them collect their money in the United States, send it back to China so that they could basically earn that revenue in that country, which their bank, no bank basically allows you to do that.
Right.
There's no bank that really exists that says like, okay, let's go back to Canada. I'm a Canadian business, but I want a bank account in the UK so I can receive money from my customers in the UK. That does not exist in the world today. So that's why there's all these service providers who have been created to kind of solve for those problems.
Yeah, there's so many nuances to this, like the need for evolution, right? And hence this kind of unfortunate titled, segment FinTech. But fundamentally, it's really interesting because I think technology should definitely drive, I guess, the protocols around how money is, stored and translated and moved around, because fundamentally it's IOUs, right?
Yeah.
We're not actually dealing with cash moving around.
No, for sure. And it's funny, you start talking about technology and banks. When we started getting into this space, I would
And when was this? When was this?
So I've been in financial services for over 10 years personally, but like Loop as a platform that helps companies move money internationally really started in 2021. So that was kind of the inception behind this idea of, can we build an international banking platform? So it's only about a couple years old now. But we've been in financial services since 2014 as a business.
As Lending Loop.
Exactly. So
is that a different business?
No, it's the same company.
Same company.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've essentially diversified our offering. So originally, maybe I'll take a step back and tell you a little bit about my story.
Step back.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I grew up the son of two entrepreneurs. My parents were both business owners. My childhood.
What business were they in?
My mom was a caterer. So she ran a catering business. She also had a couple of kind of like local stores as well, where she would like actually sell food products. So I used to work, growing up in that business, I used to work, as a waiter. I used to work in the kitchen. When I became a teenager, I started doing the books. So I've kind of like seen all aspects of what it's like to run a small business through that. Yeah. And so, that experience really shaped my perspective, obviously, on the world, but also on entrepreneurship and building a business.
Yeah.
And with a kid who had a immense passion for technology and finance, which were really like the two things that, for whatever reason, I just like was drawn to technology. I used to build computers as a kid. I like taught myself how to program so I could mod video games, like that type of stuff.
Yeah.
The thing that, always struck me when I was dealing with the finances of my parents' businesses was it was still done in an incredibly manual offline way, right? Even like in the 2000s. The way that you would transact was still manual. And then fast forward to 2020, I would have conversations with entrepreneurs kind of later on in my journey. And I would say like, how are you getting paid? And they would say, well, someone's sending me a paper check, and I have to go into my bank branch to deposit that check, right? Like things like that. Or, I'd say, how are you paying your vendors in the US? Well, I've got to use a Canadian credit card. They've got to take my Canadian credit card. They're charging me 3%. My bank's charging me another 5% on top of that on foreign exchange fees. So I'm losing 8% on every transaction. And you'd try to understand like why that's the case as you kind of dove deeper into this, those problems. Yeah. And the reason is that, banks have had no incentive to make that better. Yeah.
Right. And I think this this is a classic kind of problem. Maybe and we'll take a step back, because you're working now in a global arena. So what's your lens on the global landscape for innovation within finance, within banking? Is Canada different than the rest of the world?
We're very far behind. So, I was talking about a little bit about how small businesses have always been underserved, and that's universal. I actually grew up in England, so
Yeah, I was going to
from
ask
London.
because there's a lilt in your accents.
Yeah. So my parents, the story I was talking about, that their businesses were in London. I grew up there, and the same story is true there.
Yeah.
So I think this paradigm of small businesses being underserved is not a uniquely Canadian issue. It's a
Right.
global issue where banks have moved continuously up the stream and tried to service larger and larger businesses in search of profits. And so they've left the smaller people behind.
Yeah.
And so that's true internationally. But talking about Canada, we're 10, 15 years behind even the UK, for example, when it comes
Even
to
the
finance.
UK,
Yeah.
who doesn't have electricity.
Who doesn't have electricity? We're quite far behind them. There's several reasons for that.
Yeah.
It stems from the way that our banking system is constructed, with basically only 5 players in that space, and it being incredibly difficult for anyone to compete with them because of the regulatory setup and structure that exists within Canada. So, we, just to give you a couple examples, when I started in this space, like I said, 2014 was when we started Lending Loop. People were talking about real-time payments coming out in the next 2 years. We're now coming up on 2024, and there's still no real-time payments in Canada. They've had real-time payments in the UK since, I don't know the exact year, but probably early 2000s. So we're talking like, 20 years later, still no real-time payments.
But isn't that not an aspect of innovation, but more one of regulation, in the sense that the banks make money off of holding money? So by collapsing the time that they're holding that money, it kind of threatens the leverage that they internally use to make profit.
For sure.
I'm simplifying things, but
simplification is good, and I think that really does articulate the point in its simplest form. You're right. As if I was a bank, I also wouldn't want to make it easier for people to move money out of my accounts, right?
Yeah. Not without a good stack of really differentiated products where you're making money in a hybrid fashion. But like you said in the beginning, banks are fundamentally core focused.
Yeah, exactly. You're hitting the nail on the head in terms of understanding why things exist the way that they are.
Right.
And so there has to be an unnatural push to move us out of that. And so, like, you're looking at the UK, they've come out with new policies and new regulations to enable competition. So they came out with a framework to allow what are referred to as challenger banks. So if you and I wanted to go and start a bank, we could actually do that in the UK. So we could go over there. I mean, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but we could actually start a bank. You can't really do that in Canada. You'd need $100 million to do that plus.
In terms of liquidity ratio, like the whatever you call that, what's that called?
Yeah,
the amount that the bank needs to have.
Reserve ratios, liquidity ratios, and then it's in terms of that, but it's also in terms of your compliance infrastructure. So one of the big things with financial regulation in general in Canada is we're not particularly good at what's called proportionate regulation. So we basically say, like, if you're the largest bank in Canada, RBC, you are going to be regulated under the same scrutiny as a bank that is, 1/100th of the size of that bank. Right?
Yeah, so then that's a competitive barrier for entrance.
Yeah.
We got to spend so much money to hire so many people to just fill out forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous because I think we're at a point where societally, the majority of people assume a level of infrastructure and infrastructural justification for the existence of the banks and the monopolies with which they hold. It's like people treat putting their money in the bank, not that bank is they don't think of it as a public company or a private company or a company. They think of it as some sort of societal infrastructure.
Yeah. Like it's the government or something like that, right? Like people almost treat it in that way.
And in business communities, this was also kind of like a shockwave, I think now this is of course talking more about the States, but with the recent failures of a couple of the banks, like Silicon Valley Bank, a couple of our clients banked with Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was the shock that they had that suddenly their capital, which was really their startups who got the money from someone else, but like that money was threatened. And it was like, well, we can't exist without that money because they had no real way to make money. They're venture backed. It's very interesting because it was only in moments like that where people start saying, hey, wait, like this is actually not as safeguarded, and it's not like we've translated our cash into bullion somewhere, and it can't be stolen because it's too heavy.
For sure. And the simplistic resolution to that is that people say, oh, I'll move it to a larger bank, right? Like, so that was like the impulsive reaction.
Right.
You could argue, okay, maybe that makes sense. The larger banks are more protected or quote unquote too big to fail. But I think the real way that you should be looking at it as a business owner is like, how do I manage my own risk? When you look at all other aspects of the business, right? If you look at how you're acquiring customers, how you're processing transactions for your business, how you're retaining customers, you don't just rely on a third party and say like, yeah, like they're going to take care of it, right? You don't like look at Shopify, for example, and say, I don't even need to know how Shopify works. Like they're just going to, find me customers and run my business. That's not how it works in any other part.
Right.
But for some reason in financial services, as you're right, I think we've been trained to be a little bit complacent and saying like, I'm just going to put my money here and trust it's okay. Now, I think that there is absolutely a need for trust in the financial system. Like we can't have a system where everybody's just like freaking out and running around like it's the Wild West. But I do think that there is a measure to say, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, put some thought to how you're managing your money, where you're managing it. And I think that's ultimately a good thing for the industry, because I think if people think about that critically, they'll actually move away from big banks rather than towards them. Which is really what we want, because we want more competitiveness, because that will create better services at the end of the day for small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Okay, so let's go back to your story. Your mom was a kid, or your dad?
Dentist.
Dentist.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You
Still
called
no
a dentist
cavities.
an entrepreneur, because it's true, but at the same time.
For sure. Well, ran his own dental practice, right?
Right,
So I guess that's not, working in a practice would be different than running your own one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're interested in tech and interested in finance. And then, so what was the initial impetus for creating Lending Loop?
Yeah. So,
and what was Lending Loop in its first incarnation?
I'm glad you went back to the beginning of the story. So as I said, my parents are small business owners. The thing that stuck with me as a child was that when I saw them building their businesses, they had great businesses to me. They were profitable. They made money. But they weren't big.
Their work,
they enjoyed their work. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was stressful, but overall, I would say positive.
Right.
But when
Dad coming home in the evening, if I see one more molar, I swear to God.
I mean, I used to sit there and sometimes in the practice and like, look at people's teeth and do that myself. So yeah, I was very much like, one of those kids that was very integrated into
right.
Into
What's
businesses.
happening? Let me help out. Let me figure it out. Yeah, that's great.
Sure.
That's great. Me too.
But so they had great businesses, but on the other hand, when they needed access to capital or funding to grow their business, it was family and friends. Like
right.
It wasn't a third party. It wasn't a financial institution stepping in to help.
Mm-hmm.
You would go to them and they would put, you with like an 18-year-old, student who would take a look at your business's finances and then ship it off to a back office team where it would basically never be seen again.
The
because they
magic
didn't
box
care.
called underwriting.
Yeah, the magic box. So that really bothered me, because going back to what does a bank do and what is the core of a bank, they're supposed to, we just talked about how they don't do any of the other stuff well.
Mm-hmm.
But not only do they not do any of the other stuff well, they don't even do the taking money in and lending money out to people like small businesses well.
Right.
Which is what they were literally created to do. Like that's why banks were created, was to essentially create economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like create the ability for people to access capital that wouldn't otherwise be able to access it. So that really bothered me. I thought there has to be a better solve for this,
mm-hmm.
because if they're not doing their core function, somebody else needs to.
Mm-hmm.
So the original idea behind our business was, what if we could create a way for businesses to more effectively access capital from the people who are putting deposits in the bank, from just regular people who want to lend money to those businesses. So that was the idea behind Lending Loop, was basically allowing people like yourself and myself to lend money to companies when they needed access to capital. Through the journey of running that business, we learned a lot, some good lessons, some bad lessons. Ultimately, the problem with just being a lending business, and I think the banks know this too, and why they've built other services, is if you are just a lender, it's a very transactional business. You don't build a deep customer relationship.
Right.
And so that's what drove us kind of deeper into the financial services stack to say, how can we support small businesses beyond just access to capital? Right. So we still do help with that. We still have products to enable businesses to get access to funding and capital, but we wanted to go deeper in solving some of the core things that they struggle with every single day in operating their business so that we could be more of a partner to them versus just a lender.
So let's talk about that. Okay. So I'll make you repeat yourself a little bit, but what are the main things that Loop is being used for?
Yeah. So I'll give you like a couple of like very clear examples. The first one is I'm a Canadian business. I sell to customers in the United States. I need a US bank account to be able to have those customers pay me. Right now, it's very, very challenging processes to be able to open a bank account in the US.
That's to receive funds not through Visa transactions or credit card, right?
Correct.
So anything else, it's kind of like, ooh, what do we do?
Or even you might even be receiving money through like a Visa transaction or a credit card transaction, but then actually just getting that money out of your payment processor into a bank might be challenging, right? So let's just use an example. Let's say you're an Amazon seller, right? So I go on and I sell on Amazon. I just want to get my US dollar revenue into a US dollar bank account.
And not lose on the Forex.
And not lose on the Forex. Like, so not have it be converted back to Canadian dollars. And there might be several reasons for that. Maybe I want to, optimize my Forex. Maybe I have expenses in US dollars. So I don't want to convert from US to Canadian and then Canadian back to US dollars. So I just want to earn my US dollar revenue in the US. That is a problem that we solve for. So we basically will say, you can come to our platform. You can sign up digitally. You can get US bank account details. So you can get an account number and a routing number. So when your customer pays you, you give them your Loop account details, and that allows you to basically receive that revenue into this domestic bank account. So that's on Money In. We can basically help you get paid.
And it's in how many countries?
Today, we do that in the US, the UK, and all of Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Canada.
But our focus is, interestingly, like I was saying, domestic banking, generally works okay. It's when you start to move money across borders that people really start to struggle. So our core value prop is on people who are either receiving money in those markets or sending money internationally.
Right.
So we can also send money. So that's money coming in. Now, let's say, I'm buying from a supplier in China because that's where maybe some of the inputs to my product come from.
Sure.
We can also help with that facilitation of the payment going outbound to China much cheaper, faster, and more effectively than if you did that through a bank or another provider.
And the second example, tell me if this is correct. Credit cards, multiple credit cards.
Yeah.
Virtual credit cards, physical credit cards. Like, for example, the use case for us, my barista down at front desk is, he needs to buy milk all the time.
Yeah.
And our regular drop off that I get post billed for the espresso company won't do dairy product, so they'll drop off the oat. So he needs a card to be able to run across the road or wherever to get the milk from.
Yeah.
Easy if I have a Loop card.
Correct.
And a Loop card or an account, tell me about the functioning of the account versus the card, especially the virtualized ones.
Yeah.
And how you can move money between them and think of it differently than just a credit card that's accruing interest. And where does the interest go and how can I sidestep it?
For sure. So let me kind of explain why we created that credit card product. So that was going to be. I'm glad you brought that up.
Was that number two?
That was number two.
I won a prize.
So you win. Number two is this multi-currency credit card that we created. So you started to hit on some of the several features that are key features that are reasons people use the product. At its core, the big problem that exists with credit cards today is they are single currency cards. So if you have a card from your bank, that card, if you use it in any other currency, will convert that transaction into Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
On average, the fee that banks charge on that is 5.7%.
It's that high?
Yeah. That's the average fee.
To do the currency exchange.
Just on currency exchange.
Wow.
So that just to put that in perspective.
That's ridiculous.
Right? If you're a business and you spend $1 million on your card in a year, which is reasonable for a business.
Yeah.
Like some businesses will spend $1 million. You will lose almost $60,000 just on card fees. That's it. And that alone. So that was like the core problem that we solved for originally, because we would talk to these same types of businesses. I'm selling in the US or I'm selling in Europe or the UK. So I'm doing these cross-border transactions, and I also have expenses in those currencies. And when I use my card to pay in those currencies, my transaction gets converted, I lose a significant portion. So we came out with this idea of like a multi-currency card, which basically would allow people to spend money in those different currencies, but also pay the balance back in that same currency that you spend.
They're not losing on the...
There's no FX.
Wow.
So it's funny because there's also, you may have heard of these cards called no FX fee cards. Like you sometimes see them advertised, like, no FX fees. Right. There's still a 2.5% fee on no FX fee card.
Yeah, so all no, it's not for the FX, but it's a service fee.
Yeah. So we've taken it from 5.7 down to 2.5%, but you're still actually paying a fee on those cards because there's all these embedded fees in the transaction, right? So it's very opaque.
So then how does Loop make money? And what's the basis of your business model?
For sure. So on the card, I'll just finish.
Santa Claus.
Yeah. Or Robin Hood. So on the card, for example, what we do, like I said, is you can spend in US dollars and repay in US dollars. So tying it all together, you have a US dollar account with Loop. You have a US dollar card with Loop. You get revenue into a US dollar account. You can use that money to pay off your US dollar card. And you've basically eliminated lots of different fees because you've eliminated the conversion fees of the money coming in as well as the money going out. So that's about 8% of fees that you've eliminated. Right. How we make money is we say we don't need to make 8% for this to be worthwhile. Yeah. So we know that if you're earning money in US dollars and you're a Canadian business, you're probably going to still have foreign exchange associated with your business. But we charge 0.5% instead of charging 8%. So we just charge a much more reasonable fee. And the way we're able to do that is it's all digital. It's all, there's no individual. The way the banks are still doing it in most cases is you're actually going into a branch and you're having somebody manually key in your wire transfer that you're sending internationally. Right. We've built a platform that allows companies to do that all digitally. So the cost basis of making 0.5% actually makes sense for us.
But what's this powered by? Like, what's is it on a platform? Is it through a Visa's API or something?
So we've built our own platform.
Okay.
And essentially we've plugged into bank networks around the world. And so what's really cool about what Swift. We do, Swift is one of them, but we also plug into a lot of local networks. And what's really cool about that is, let's say right now you went to go send money to someone in the UK. If you went to your bank and did that, that would be a Swift transfer. They would charge you a $50 fee. Yep. Someone would manually enter it, which is very error prone. Like there's a lot of issues with Swift transfers because like the person might mess up the account details and all this stuff.
Yep.
So there's a lot of issues with respect to sending international wire transfers and cost. What we do is we have your money here in Canada. So you have Canadian dollars with us. You're sending it to somebody in the UK. What we will actually do is we will take your money locally in Canada, move it in the background locally to the UK, and then send it through the local UK payment network. So instead, there's no SWIFT involved in that transaction. We've taken the money from you locally here. We've moved it over to the UK and then sent it locally over there.
Have you moved it, or are you doing a kind of like an IOU system? Because this is like how it was explained to me how Zoom used to work.
Yes.
Or Zoom works, which PayPal bought, right?
It's a similar concept to that for sure. Yeah, which is like you have a lot of different transactions and we work with vendors in the background to get volume as well, right? Okay. So that like they're aggregating the volume of not just Loop, but also, like let's say 100 other companies that are doing some type of cross-border transaction for some reason. So what happens is, it exactly is what you're getting to. You might be moving money from here to the UK. Somebody else is moving money from the UK back to here. So all those transactions offset. And so the actual amount of money that needs to get moved is minimized because you're kind of creating a market for transacting, right?
And that's all digitally calculated in your platform.
Yeah. I mean, so again, we work with third parties as well on that. So some of that, we're transacting on ourselves. Some of that we're working with third parties on in terms of helping facilitate. But what you need to know as like a Loop customer is I click a button and my money gets sent to my customer, my vendor in the UK instantly through their local payment rails. So in the UK, they have instant payments. So we can actually facilitate an instant payment from Canada to the UK through our platform.
With zero fees?
With no fees.
0.05?
Well, only if you're exchanging money. So that's only the 0.5% is only if you are exchanging from Canadian to British pounds. But let's say you have British pounds with us, no fees at all. Like you can basically receive the money and send it.
What are the other functions that Loop is looking to add
Yeah.
in the next little while to the customer experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would basically define what we do into 4 categories. The first category is accounts. So being able to actually have money stored with us, like using us essentially as a place to store money.
Yep.
In Canada, the US, the UK, Europe, and hopefully more markets in the future. So that's category 1. Category 2 is accounts receivable. So I mentioned like you can actually have somebody send money into these accounts. So if your customer wants to pay you, they can put money into your Loop account. We also now support the ability for you to pull money from your customers. So let's say you want to use Loop to invoice a customer. So you have a customer in the US that owes you, $25,000 because you have a contract with them and they have to pay you, $5,000 to $2,000 a month. You can actually use Loop to collect that money. So we will pull that money from that customer on your behalf as well.
As a bank to Loop transaction.
It's like a bank-to-bank transaction.
Okay.
Much cheaper than a credit card transaction, obviously, which is on the like 3% on average.
Right.
Here we're talking at somewhere between kind of 0.1 and 0.5% as a fee. So a much cheaper way to collect money.
Yeah.
So that's all in accounts receivable. Then you've got accounts payable. So that's like, accounts receivable, money coming in, accounts payable, money going out.
Right.
That would be all the examples we were talking about. A credit card is a version of accounts payable. So I'm using a card to pay people. It could also be I'm sending a local payment in Europe, the UK, sending it to somebody in China, in Africa, in South America. That would all fall in that category of accounts payable.
Yeah.
So basically the way to think about that is we want whoever you need to pay, whether it's a contractor, an employee, somebody who's giving you supplies for your business, somebody who's selling you inventory, we want to make it as easy to pay them as possible. So you can use our platform to literally click a button and send your suppliers money through us. And then the last part is foreign exchange. So oftentimes in the process of receiving money, sending money, managing money, you'll need to exchange between your different currencies. And we want to make that possible in the cheapest way imaginable. So we want to make it possible for you to do foreign exchange at a fraction of the cost that it would take or would charge if you're using one of the big banks to do it.
But fundamentally, that should all be for the customer. That should ideally be automated. So it's like, just like make it as cheap as possible for me. I'm not going to think about what account things come in and out of. So that'd be amazing.
You got it. And we also, so the other big thing that we have started building out is integrations, right? So integrations into your sales channels, integrations into your accounting system. So if you use QuickBooks or Xero and you want to integrate your Loop data with that data to make the payment information flow more seamlessly between them, you can do that as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty integral, especially for e-com transactions. Like we do this on a small scale, but actually a lot of our customers pay us with Visa. A lot, in fact. So we're that case example that you mentioned that's earning like $1 million on Visa transactions a year and paying so much out in fees. And we use Stripe for the ease of use and the integration points. But my bookkeeper, who's a little old school, hates it, right? Because we get clumped transactions into the account. So he has to backtrack and unpack what that clump is, which is like manual work. It could probably be programmed, but like, so there's a lot of innovation that can even happen on the challenger fintechs that are being used already for this sort of stuff. So are you totally stoked to be doing what you're doing?
I love it. I mean, it's very cool to create a product that people use every day. And also to have this goal of helping businesses actually grow, right? Like the most fulfilling part of what we do as a team, the thing that we get fired up about is like when we see the money that we save a company and how that allows them to invest in actually growing their business. And so when we see our customers' revenue double or triple in a year after using our product, that's what gets us really excited. So, I was speaking to a customer yesterday and, a prospective customer, and I was like kind of like a sales call. And they were like, I've had all these requests to use our product in the US, right? Like I'm actually, they only currently are in Canada and they sell to restaurants in Canada. So they're in the restaurant space. And like all these restaurants in the US are actually asking to use our product, but I have no way to do that because I can't actually like invoice them or collect that money locally in the US. So your platform is about to unlock a huge revenue opportunity that I just couldn't get access to before because my bank would not enable me to get a US account.
Exciting for sure.
Yeah.
That is exciting. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't think about because we always think of microtransactions and credit card payments. But for anything large, no one's going to pay you. Like we found that anything larger than $5,000, people will not pay with a credit card.
For sure.
Or they'll have to juggle to get someone, if it's a corporate client, they're going to get the boss. Super boss has to give his like beautiful, black card that has the limit unlocked. But then that's also another side, the flip side, which is what you're facilitating, which is these virtual cards, I think is quite a fascinating accounting mechanism.
For sure.
Because using Loop, I could spin up a card for any account that I want to see transactions clumped into.
Yeah.
And then lock the availability of credit on that card.
Correct.
Also, is that virtual card available on an app to like tap on a payment terminal?
App is coming. So we obviously have physical cards, so you can tap that on the payment terminal. And then the virtual cards right now basically are used for e-commerce transactions. So you can use those cards like to buy on Amazon or pay for Facebook ads or any of that type of stuff. So we don't have an actual like mobile app just yet. It's kind of physical and virtual. But to your point, it is coming. So stay tuned for that. But on the card product, there's a lot of solves there. Like you said, like you can use that for team management. So we have a lot of people that will create cards for team members, create cards for departments. So, okay, like I want to create a card for my marketing team, for travel expenses, for food. So, and your bookkeeper will love that because now they look at the transaction data and it's all like pre-categorized right away, right? So it kind of shaves their time by a lot. So that's kind of one big solve. The other thing, you were talking about credit limits. Most business owners still use a personal card for their business. And the result of that, there's a lot of complexities that gets created. It might impact your personal credit and stuff like that. So when you're going to buy a house or whatever, they'll be like, hey, what's this card that you're spending, $25,000 on a month? And you're like, oh, it's for my business. So you've got to explain that generally. But even aside from that problem, a lot of personal cards cap out from a limit perspective. So, again, I was talking to another customer yesterday, fast growing business, really awesome apparel company. They were paying their credit card off every 2 days because they were putting so much spend on their card as their business was going. And they had to just keep paying it and paying it and paying it, right?
Yeah. And I've even talked to our big bank in the past about saying, well, what if I just give you a bunch of cash, like to de-risk the availability of credit? Like I'm using my own money. Now it's a debit card,
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we don't work that way. So like, well, how through you am I firstly getting this like multi-card thing? They just don't do it. The banks just don't do it, which is a nightmare. And then raising credit limits. Like my personal credit limit on one of my cards is like 6 times what the business's is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense whatsoever.
Totally. It's wild that like still, if you're a small business, even running, a multi-million-dollar business, that the way they're setting credit limits for you is based off of your personal credit score. But that's where we are. And it goes, we've kind of repeated on this subject a bit, but banks are not focused on solving for that segment. And that's why we exist, because we want to actually solve for financial services for that segment of the market.
So do you have a play to work with the banks, at least in Canada?
We do work with banks, actually. So I guess when I'm talking about this, I'm actually more talking about like the large banks that underservice. A lot of the smaller banks, like so the non-Big Five banks.
Credit unions and stuff.
Yeah, credit unions and smaller banks definitely have an appetite and an interest to service this market, but maybe don't have the technology infrastructure or don't have the reach to actually service them. So we do work with banks today, and actually how our products exist and are facilitated is through banks. So we cannot be a bank ourselves. I was talking about like in the UK, maybe we could, but in Canada, we can't. And so we rely on our bank partnerships to be able to provide the services that we actually offer to customers. But unfortunately, right now, the largest banks are not interested in partnering on that. It's really the kind of the smaller ones. But I think over time, with regulatory changes and policy changes, hopefully that changes, because as more people recognize that this is what's good for small businesses, and small businesses is what grows our economy, there'll be more of a conscious effort to want to unlock more competition in that space.
Yeah, no, I mean, even employment, right? This was a stat that came out of the pandemic in 2020, was that the bulk of Canada's, outside of government, the bulk of Canada's employees were employed by small business.
Yeah.
And then there was all that, the questions around how small businesses were, supported politically through the pandemic and the crisis of, in a way, of how we saw a lot of businesses close through the pandemic just because of a little bit of this,
Yeah. And
support that they needed. And then jobs going away.
Yeah.
And then this constant question of like, well, how can you audit accurately unemployment in today's world where employment is for an hour or a day?
Yeah.
The publicly available government stats are not accurate, you know? So it's very interesting. Yeah. Small, medium-sized businesses really are the lifeblood of the economy, and the source of kind of employment at large, I would think, especially as large companies are downscaling with efficiencies of software and AI and everything.
Yeah, I mean the stat, 90% of the private sector are employed by small and medium-sized businesses.
Say that stat again.
90% of the private sector workforce, meaning non-government workforce, are employed by small or medium-sized businesses. So
crazy.
So the largest businesses, actually, as big as they are, only employ 10% of the private sector workforce. So that's,
but those guys make more than us, so they get their voices are louder.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but so I think it's very exciting. And to this note, I have to ask, how is Loop reaching customers, at least in Canada? Like, how are you getting in front of all of these SMBs that are, no doubt, operators are, of course, concerned with day to day. They're looking for solutions, but they don't know how to procure them.
Yeah, this podcast.
Excellent.
No, we've been fortunate. We really have quite a organic kind of word of mouth type of growth trajectory.
Okay, cool.
We solve so many of these pain points. Like even in the time we've been talking, we've kind of jumped around from cards to getting paid in other countries to making payments to getting access to capital, right? Like those to managing foreign exchange. Mm-hmm. All of these different things at its core are what banks are supposed to do, but really underservice small businesses on. And so the net result of that is we have customers who have really gotten to love our product.
Nice.
And we get a lot of referrals. A lot of business owners know other business owners, and they tell their friends and their family about our product. And that's really how we've gotten a lot of our growth so far in our story. Obviously, there are marketing efforts that we run mostly kind of through digital marketing and things like that to kind of drum up some interest or awareness. But
ads. Those are ads, digital ads.
Okay. But most of, I'd say, that's only a small fraction, call it like 10% of where our user bases come from. Most of our user bases come from the organic word of mouth referral type of stuff. And so that's sometimes it's small business owners, but sometimes it's also people like accountants, right? Or agencies who might work with small business owners who use our product and say, hey, I'm using this great product. I'm saving on multi-currency, check it out. Or, hey, can I use Loop to pay you? Right. Because if you use Loop to pay somebody else, then that person also learns about Loop, of course, right? Or vice versa. If you're using Loop to invoice your customer, they learn about Loop and they might say, oh, this is really cool. Why don't I use it to invoice my customers as well? It seems like a way better solution.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I always love hearing stories of companies that grow organically that way, because the strength ultimately of your relationship, of your brand, your relationship with your customers, when it's at the point that word of mouth is reliable as a means of growing and finding new customers, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah. And, for me, the customer is why we do it. It's 100. There's no other reason why we exist. And so, we want to be the exact opposite of a bank when it comes to customer service. There's no call through like those call prompts where you press like 8 different buttons. There's no
get lost,
send us an email and we'll reply in 2 weeks. I will pick up the phone and I will talk to any customer, directly myself if they need support from me. And that's like the approach and mentality that we have as a business is we are fundamentally different from a customer service and success perspective than how traditional financial institutions operate. And so, it's here on this podcast. If someone's listening to this and they want my number so they can call me about a customer service issue, I'm ready to pick up the phone and have a conversation. And that's fun. That's breaking the cycle of, I think, how people historically view the way that they interact with financial institutions. Nobody's picking up and
Right.
picking up the phone and calling the CEO of TD or RBC or BMO, right?
Yeah, he's on the golf course.
Yeah.
What also on that note, what is the composure of your team and how does growth look for Loop in the next couple of years?
Yeah. I mean, we're hyper focused on company growth, meaning like the number of companies that we service right now.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, we've, like I said, really benefited from a lot of organic growth to date. We're only about kind of a year and a half now into the journey of actually offering the product that we offer in terms of kind of banking and payments, right? As I said, like the original business was in lending and we've kind of diversified into that. So, we're really in that early stage hyper growth mode. We're adding, another 5 to 10% to our user base every single month. So we're definitely growing that quite rapidly. And that's where we're making investments as well as a team. And in terms of, growth and hiring is we want to kind of bring in people to help us get the word out there about Loop, to make sure that more small businesses know who we are. Because when people discover us, I'd say it's from my past, it's one of the easiest products I've ever solved because the pitches will save you time or money, right? So it's
either way you win.
Yeah, it's a win-win solution. The question that people ask me often, I'm finding is like, what's the catch, right? Like this sounds too good to be true. Like
because everyone's used to snake oil salesman.
Yeah. Snake oil salesman and also, hidden fees with banks. Like everyone is used to like, there's some hidden charge here that you're not telling me about. Like, where's the hidden charge? Like I've got to kind of go with a magnifying glass and find it.
Yeah.
So that's the focus right now. And yeah, we're definitely just excited about, getting the word out there and having as many small businesses in Canada sign up to our product and use us and help those companies unlock their future growth as well.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for spending time talking with me. It was a pleasure having you in the studio and hearing, about the kind of little bit of the foundation, a little bit of kind of like what's going on in the FinTech space through your lens and where you see the need for innovation for SMBs. And I'm definitely sure a lot of our audience will enjoy this episode. You did say that you'd pick up the phone if they called. So what, if there are any kind of like, shout outs that you want to give or contacts that you want to give to the audience who are looking to learn more about Loop or looking to get involved with you guys somehow?
For sure.
Go for it.
So I mean, our website is getloop.ca. So get and loop. And if anyone wants to connect with me directly, check me out on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place to find me. So my name's Cato Pastoll, CATOPASTOLL. So connect me with there, and we can definitely jump on a call and chat further. So cool. I'm here and ready to chat with whoever wants to chat.
Right on. Thanks, man. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.